Centaurs are weird. They're the type of thing you can go a whole lifetime believing makes perfect sense, but then when you one day take a shower or a very long poop, you really think about it for a minute while in deep thought, realize how bizarre they are. If you don't understand what I mean by centaurs being weird, allow me to demonstrate. Here we have a centaur. Very cool. Now here's a fawn. Okay, also pretty cool. Here is a fawn reversed. Okay, kind of gross, but I still see how this could be birthed in a fantasy setting. Now here is a centaur reversed. Yeah, see what I mean? No? Okay, let's count limbs. A horse has 4 legs. A human has 2 legs and 2 arms. A fawn has 2 legs and 2 arms. A centaur has 6 limbs in total, which means it's the only mammal to do so. By the way, this is why dragons and Skywrath having both arms and wings make no sense. Since dragons and Skywrath have 6 limbs, are they a kind of centaur? Yeah, I know, centaurs, Skywrath, and dragons are fantasy creatures. They're part horse, part human, they breathe fire, they don't follow biological rules to begin with. I know, but still, am I the only one annoyed by this? No other lizards or mammals have 6 limbs. The skeleton simply hasn't evolved to do this, other than for arthropods and stuff like insects and crabs. But dragons and centaurs are just out of nowhere allowed to, and no one bats an eye. And it's not just a visual thing. How does digestion work for centaurs? Like the human centipede? Do they eat food, digest it, turn it into poop, and it re-enters another stomach again? Does it work like cow digestion, where they have 4 stomachs, or 2 in this case? How does breathing work? Do the 4 lungs work, or do they only use the upper 2? If the horse lungs also work, breathing would be really annoying. I mean, that's a long-ass way for the air to travel. How about pregnancy? Does the sperm enter both wombs, always giving birth to at least 2 children, 1 in each womb? Or is only the horse womb active? Okay, I promise, we will talk about Dota 2 lore in a sec, just had to finish my rant because I have a lot of issues with centaurs, and I have for a long time, and every time I talk about this to my friends, they give me the fluoride stare and pretend to listen while looking for an excuse to leave. This is the one time where I can really let off some steam and excuse it as research relevant to a video. But anyways, moving on. Before we talk about the centaurs in the Dota 2 universe, let's speedrun their IRL lore, such as in Greek mythology where you might have heard of them already. A centaur, or occasionally hippocentaur, is a creature from Greek mythology with the upper body of a human and the lower body and legs of a horse. Centaurs are thought of in many Greek myths as being as wild and untamed as horses, and were said to have inhabited the region of Magnesia and Mount Pelion in Thessaly, the Pholai Oak Forest in Elis, and the Malayan Peninsula in southern Laconia. Centaurs are subsequently featured in Roman mythology and were familiar figures in the medieval bestiary. They remain a staple in modern fantastic literature. The centaurs were usually said to have been born of Ixion and Nephele. As the story goes, Nephele was a cloud made into a likeness of Hera in a plot to trick Ixion into revealing his lust for Hera to Zeus. Ixion seduced Nephele, and from that relationship centaurs were created. Another version, however, makes them children of Centaurus, a man who mated with Magnesian mares. Centaurus was either himself the son of Ixion and Nephele, inserting an additional generation, or of Apollo and the nymph Stilbe. The centaurs are best known for their fight with the Lepiths, who, according to one origin myth, would have been cousins to the centaurs. The battle, called the Centaur-maki, was caused by the centaurs' attempt to carry off Hippodamia and the rest of the Lepith women on the day of Hippodamia's marriage to Pirithous, who was the king of the Lepithae and son of Ixion. One famous centaur you might have heard of, especially if you played Age of Mythology like me, is Chiron. Chiron was notable throughout Greek mythology for his youth-nurturing nature. His personal skills tend to match those of his foster father Apollo, who taught the young centaur the art of medicine, herbs, music, archery, hunting, gymnastics, and prophecy, and made him rise above his beastly nature. Chiron was known for his knowledge and skill with medicine, and thus was credited with the discovery of botany and pharmacy, the science of herbs and medicine. Like satyrs, centaurs were notorious for being wild, lusty, overly indulgent drinkers and carousers, violent when intoxicated, and generally uncultured delinquents. Chiron, by contrast, was intelligent, civilized, and kind because he was not related directly to other centaurs due to his parentage. He was the son of the Titan Kronos and the Oceanid Philyra. Okay, but now it's finally time to talk about Dota. In Dota 2, we don't just have centaurs. I mean, we don't just have regular centaurs like you would find in Greek mythology. Think Centaur Warrunner. We also have stuff like Leshrac, who follows the rules of centaurs, but he is not related to Centaur Warrunner at all. You also have stuff like Enchantress, who might look like a deer centaur, but she's actually closer to Leshrac than Centaur Warrunner, at least in my theory. Then you have otherworldly stuff like Bane. Is he a centaur? How about Outworld Devourer? Oh my god, he has wings. Please don't tell me there's another thing which is a mix of dragon and centaur logic with 8 limbs. My definition of Dota 2 centaurs are as follows. It's to categorize and organize, but it is not canon and should only be used to make things easier to remember. The only thing they all have in common is having 6 limbs, 4 of which are legs. Centaurs are differentiated from what I call, with the lack of a better term, furries, which are anthropomorphic animals like bounty hunter and brewmaster with a regular mammalian number of limbs, which includes fawn-like things like Ricky. Centaurs are also not related to things with other animals as lower bodies, such as merfolk, gorgons, and whatever venomancer is. To qualify as a centaur, in my definition, it needs to be a creature with at least 6 limbs, 4 of which are legs. This means Puck, for example, doesn't qualify, but Outward Devourer does, even though he has 8 limbs. Okay, so now that we have it defined, let's talk about each Dota 2 centaur. The ones that fit into my definition are Centaur Warrunner, Magnus, Underlord, Outworld Devourer, Enchantress, Leshrac, and Bane, where the further they are to the left, the closer they are to the typical centaur, and the further they are to the right, the more otherworldly and unique they are. Magnus, for example, is from a whole race of Magnosauri, whereas Leshrac is one of a kind. Bear in mind, once again, this is not canon, it's simply me trying to simplify things by organizing them. Now let's start from the left. Bradwardon, the Centaur Warrunner. It is said that a centaur's road is paved with the corpses of the fallen. For the one called Warrunner, it has been a long road indeed. To outsiders, the 4-legged clans of Druid are often mistaken for simple brutish creatures. Their language has no written form, their culture lacks pictographic traditions, structured music, formalized religion. For centaurs, combat is the perfect articulation of thought, the highest expression of self. If killing is an art among centaurs, then Bradwardon the Warrunner is their greatest artist. He rose to dominance in the proving grounds of Omex, an ancient arena where centaur clans have for millennia gathered to perform their gladiatorial rites. As his fame spread, spectators came from far and wide to see the great centaur in action. Always the first to step into the arena and the last to leave, he composes a masterpiece in each guttering spray, each thrust of blood-slickened blade length. It is the poetry of blood on steel, flung in complex patterns across the pale sands of the killing floor. Warrunner defeated warrior after warrior until the arena boomed with the cheering of his name, and he found himself alone, the uncontested champion of his kind. The great belt of Omex was bestowed, wrapped around his broad torso, but in his victory, the death artist found only emptiness. For what is a warrior without a challenge? The great centaur galloped out of Omex that day with a new goal. To his people, Warrunner is the greatest warrior to ever step into the arena. Now he has set out to prove that he is the greatest fighter who ever lived. You can also see the centaur people and their culture in Artifact. The way they are tied into the story is their annual hunt of the migrating tundra hides passing through Roseleaf. For my videos about Artifact, I have a playlist if you scroll down on my channel. Magnus the Magnosaurus. The mastersmiths of Mount Jorlac agree only on a single point, that the horn of a Magnosaurus is more precious than any alloy. And of all such horns, the largest and sharpest belongs to the beast they call Magnus. For half a generation, Magnus took easy sport-goring hunters come to claim the treasures of his kin. Each time he would return to his cave with hooves and horns stained red, until his matriarch urged him and all their kin to seek refuge to the north beyond the shadow of the mountain. But Magnus scoffed, having never failed to defend his people. The Magnosauri would stay, he decided, for Magnosaurus does not believe in chance, nor does it ever change its mind. But when Mount Jorlac erupted without warning, and half his kin perished in the fire and ash, Magnus changed his mind after all. The survivors pushed north until they reached a blockade watched over by 100 hunters armed with bow and steel. Magnus expected no less. He led his fiercest brothers and sisters in a charge against their enemies, and fought with ferocity matched only by the fire-spewing mountain at his back. Meanwhile, the Magnosaurus elders, mothers, and calves vanished into the drifts. The mastersmiths are divided about what happened next. Some say Magnus reunited with his kin, while others claim he suffered mortal injuries and expired alongside the body of his matriarch. Neither theory is correct. Magnus did vow to rejoin his kin, but only after seeking out those responsible for the eruption of Mount Jorlac and watching them die upon his horn, for Magnosaurus does not believe in chance. Farvan the Dreamer. Farvan is a new hero in Artifact, and he is a prowler, another type of centaur. No real Dota hero is a prowler, but I include them since Farvan is one, and there used to be a prowler camp in Dota 2. God, I hated that prowler camp, good riddance. Verogross the Underlord. Neither myth nor song exists to tell of their coming. Deep below the surface of the world lay unknown wonders and horrors. Down and down again, well beneath the slithering magma fields and simmering roots of dormant volcanoes stands the obsidian city of Ezyog, its incomparable stonework spanning an endless cavern. Within honeycomb walls mortared with the bones of countless slaves lies the domain of the Abyssal Horde and their brutal underlord Verogross. Armed by the monstrous forge masters of his kind and well practiced in the arts of the Dark Rift, verogross is able to conjure forth flame and crippling malice through the twist between worlds. He seeks always to expand his holdings, destroying or enslaving all he encounters. Yet the lands offered by the subterranean realm are few, and so his sights have turned upward. By his command, the first waves of abyssal invaders have already marched through the rift, a few doomed legions meant merely to test the might of nations above. Now, as his full force readies itself for unending conquest, verogross himself steps into the sunlit world to announce his coming reign. Those who face the underlord will bow and pay tribute, or be crushed where they stand. Underlord and his abyssal horde are a kind of demons, perhaps only recently classified as so by a decree. Their subterranean city of Aziag appears to be of this world and not hell, and they seem to be mortal creatures, but the scholars argue this to no end whether or not they are real demons. Harbinger, the outworld destroyer. One of a lordly and magistral race, Harbinger prowls the edge of the world, sole surviving sentry of an outpost in the world at the rim of the abyss. From this jagged crystalline outworld, forever on guard, he has gazed for eternities into the heavens, alert for any stirring in the bottomless night beyond the stars. Imprinted deep in the shining lattices of his intellect lies a resonant pattern akin to prophecy, a dark music implying that eventually some evil will wake out there, beyond the edges of creation, and turns attention to our world. With his whole being focused on his vigil, Outworld Destroyer paid little attention to events closer into the sun. But at last the clamor of the ancients, and a sense of growing threat from within as well as without, sent him winging sunward to visit the plains of war. Harbinger's place in our own prophecies is unambiguous. He must be considered an omen of worse things to come, but his arrival in itself is bad enough. Ayush the Enchantress. Ayush appears to be an innocent, carefree creature of the woods, and while this is certainly true, it is hardly the sum of her story. She well understands the suffering of the natural world. She has wandered far and fared through forests bright and drear in every clime and every season, gathering friends, sharing news, bringing laughter, and healing wherever she goes. For in worlds wrecked by war, forests are leveled for the building of ships and siege engines, and even in places of peace, the woods are stripped for the building of homes and as fuel for countless hearths. Ayush hears the pleas of the small creatures, the furtive folk who need green shade and a leafy canopy to thrive. She lends her ears to those who have no other listeners. She carries their stories from the wood to the world, believing that her own good cheer is a kind of enchantment that can itself fulfill the promise of a verdant future. It's unknown if Enchantress is from a race of similar creatures, or if she's one of a kind. One theory is that she is a reincarnation of Veridisia, the goddess of nature. In my theory, she and Leshrac are sort of the yin and yang of nature, which I will elaborate on in my next video about Leshrac. Leshrac, the Tormented Soul. Leshrac, Tormented Soul, is an entity torn from the heart of nature, a liminal being that exists half in one plane of existence, half in another. His penetrating intelligence is such that he can never ignore for a moment the agonizing horror at the heart of all creation. Once a great philosopher who sought the meaning of existence, he plumbed the depths of nature with the haunted chronoptic crystals and was forever altered by the hideous mysteries thereby revealed to him. Now the darkest depths of his enlightenment are illumined by only the fitful glare of his arrogance. Like other elemental characters, he is completely at one with nature, but in his case it is a nature lurid and vile. He alone sees the evil truth of reality, and has no use for those who believe the cosmos reserves a special reward for those who practice benevolence. Leshrac's lore is at first glance very confusing, so I will make my next video about him and my interpretation of what he is. So I will not elaborate more here. Atropos the Bane. When the gods have nightmares, it is Bane Elemental who brings them. Also known as Atropos, Bane was born from the midnight terrors of the goddess Nyctacia. A force of terror too powerful to be contained by sleep, he surfaced from her slumbers, fed upon her immortality, and stole his vaporous form from her inky blood. He is the essence of fear. Mortals who hear his voice hear their darkest secrets whispered in their ear. He calls to the hidden fear in every hero's heart. Wakefulness is no protection, for Bane's black blood, continuously dripping, is a tar that traps his enemies in nightmares. In the presence of Bane, every hero remembers to fear the dark. Check out my video about Bane for more info about him in the top right corner, or here at the end screen. That's it for this video. Thank you for watching, and until next time, peace.